The topic for this video presentation has been developing in my mind for a long time. Now that the 2024 presidential campaigns are underway, and the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, USCCB, has again identified abortion as the primary issue going into this election cycle, this feels like the opportune moment to address this topic. For those of you who do not accept Pope Francis as the validly elected Vicar of Christ, and or believe the 2020 election was stolen, and or believe that all Democrats are soulless baby killers, you might as well stop watching now and go back to trolling those you hate on social media. There is no way I can convince you that the world is round, that water is wet, or that this is 2024 and not 1924. However, if you are someone who was like me 20 or 30 or even 40 years ago, and who, for the sake of your immortal soul, feared voting for Democratic candidates, but have over time struggled with what has become of conservatism in the United States and the unrecognizable state of the Republican Party, you need to listen to me. YouTube limits me to uploading videos that are no longer than 15 minutes, and what I have to say here is going to exceed that limit. So I have divided my presentation into two parts. This is part one of the pro-life scam and is entitled Faulty Facts. Let me first disclose that the label conservative was one that was foisted on me back when I was much younger. My preference and reverence for classical art and music, as well as my appreciation for many old Catholic devotional traditions and customs, made me appear to be among those in line with the reactionary movement that arose in American Catholicism in the 1980s. My artistic tastes do not reflect my theological or political beliefs. I have striven throughout my life to remain faithful to approved Catholic teachings and liturgical norms, regardless of what was popular or trendy at different times of my life. It may not be my style to push for change, but I accept change when authorized by the proper church authority, which I understand to be in the hands of the Pope and all bishops united with him. Secondly, I must also make it clear that I do not identify myself as pro-choice when it comes to the politics of abortion. I admit that I am uncomfortable listening to representatives of Planned Parenthood and to those who speak of the unborn as a choice rather than as a human being. I am, however, someone who also prefers to deal with hard facts and tries to avoid being influenced by emotionally charged arguments that are not rooted in truth. My current distrust of the conservative reactionary movement in the American Catholic Church arose from a personal experience involving a very close friend back in the 1980s. She was, and technically still is, a Colatine Poor Clare nun. She has never been what you would call a liberal, and what happened to her had nothing to do with her theology or political beliefs. Today, nearly 40 years later, I still consider her a dear friend and am not at liberty to tell her story or reveal the details of what transpired at her monastery in the early to mid-1980s, or how she ended up living apart from her monastery for the rest of her life. What I can attest is that her superior, out of jealousy, manipulated connections with the Vatican Curia to force her out of the monastery, and that the process was riddled with deceit and trickery. I was made fully aware of this treachery while helping my friend pull together the documents she was required to assemble to secure her situation after it all fell out. It would take another whole video to describe how the United States Federation of Colatine Poor Clares has transformed into a cult-like organization, robbing member monasteries of their rightful canonical autonomy. The mindset that has overtaken these highly venerable communities of nuns is very much the same mindset adopted by many bishops in this country. This mindset adheres to a rigid code based on a set of narrowly defined immutable doctrines and is characterized by a militant conformity among its followers that does not tolerate the slightest deviation in form or content. Those who adhere to this mindset are convinced of their own righteous judgment and believe it is entirely justifiable to circumvent rules and deny due process to achieve their ends. And what are those ends? They are none other than maintaining power and control over the people they lead. Those in command insist that maintaining their position and defending their privileges without opposition are the only options to be considered. These same leaders inspire a cult-like veneration among their followers. Financial support is critical to the development of the organizations under the care of these cult leaders. Well-established monasteries, religious orders, and popular congregations of religious generally manage to attract and maintain benefactors and the assistance of wealthy friends. Habited monks, nuns, and other religious attract support by projecting a romanticized version of themselves for public veneration. For bishops seeking funds for pet projects or their own peculiar organizations within their dioceses require big bucks from well-heeled Catholic individuals and organizations. It is not uncommon for these same wealthy Catholics to be heavily involved with politics and be staunch supporters of Republican politicians who legislate in ways that benefit these wealthy donors. Money from politically conservative donors plays a significant role in supporting Catholic dioceses and institutions in the United States. One such donor is Timothy Bush, founder of the Napa Institute, which has hosted symposiums that are openly critical of Pope Francis, and has proudly hosted Republican speakers such as Lindsey Graham and Mike Pence. The single issue that plays a critical role in forging relationships between arch-conservative Republican donors and Catholic bishops and institutions is the issue of abortion. Represented by the noble concept of protecting the unborn, the sole objective of overturning Supreme Court decision Roe v. Wade has galvanized the alliance between the USCCB and staunch Catholic supporters of Republican candidates over the past 30 or 40 years. Prioritizing the criminalization of abortion above all other issues directly contradicts the teaching of Pope Francis in his apostolic exhortation Gaudete et Exsultate, in which he states that our passion to protect life must go beyond the unborn to the lives of the poor, those already born, the destitute, the abandoned, and the underprivileged, the vulnerable, infirm, and elderly exposed to covert euthanasia, the victims of human trafficking, new forms of slavery, and every form of rejection. It is plain to see why Pope Francis is unpopular with Tim Bush and his Republican friends. An effective method used to convince Catholic voters to vote for so-called pro-life Republicans is to cite numbers of abortions performed since the 1972 Roe v. Wade ruling. These numbers on their own are staggering, especially to those who abhor abortion as a method of birth control allegedly used by cold-hearted baby-hating women. These counts include procedures for extracting a dead or severely unviable fetus or the treatment of an ectopic pregnancy. These numbers alone do not adequately demonstrate if entirely elective abortions are increasing or decreasing in our society over time. A closer look at abortion rates reveals a story which virulent pro-life people do not want you to know. Not being a statistical genius myself, let me attempt to describe the significance of abortion rate statistics. Let's say we want to compare safe driving data between two towns. Town A is home to 100 active drivers, and in a given year reports a total of 10 automobile accidents. In the same year, Town B reports 20 automobile accidents, but the number of active drivers in the town is 500. Though the number of accidents in Town B is double that of Town A, Town B has 5 times the number of drivers, which means that the accident rate in Town B is lower than that of Town A. This chart traces abortion rates beginning with Supreme Court Roe v. Wade ruling in 1972 through the year 2020. The rate soared to its highest point in 1980 and 1981, then tended downward to an historic pre-Roe point in 2012 and continued downward until 2017, after which there was a sharp uptick through 2020. Pink areas on the chart indicate Republican administrations, whereas blue areas are Democratic. Note that even though the abortion rate has been decreasing over the past 40 years, under Republican administrations, the abortion rate increased, sometimes sharply. Now overlay the chart with the names of sitting presidents since 1989, and it is plainly revealed that sharp increases occurred in the presidencies of both first and second President Bushes, while the rate trended uninterruptedly downwards during the terms of Presidents Clinton and Obama. A significant increase in the abortion rate occurred during the term of Donald Trump. If the goal is to protect the unborn from the scourge of elective abortions, these statistics demonstrate that Democratic administrations have been overwhelmingly successful at achieving that end. I could go on and list the many examples of misinformation and misrepresentations made by the virulent anti-abortion crowd. The news media has been reporting the corruption and questionable character of the conservative Supreme Court justices. Video from their confirmation hearings shows each of them testifying that Roe v. Wade is established law and could not be changed. However, their actions proved otherwise a year and a half ago when the Dobbs decision was handed down. Deceit, corruption, and denial of due process have long been the normative strategy of the conservative movement in this country and in parts of the Catholic Church since the 1980s. The level of dishonest and deceitful behavior among these factions has grown worse in the past decade. In the next video, I will describe the dangerous path on which many find themselves over the year ahead should people continue to be taken in by the pro-life lie.